I recently had a chance to talk with Lisa Tamayo, CEO of Scollar. She's a serial entrepreneur, angel investor, advisor, and mentor, and my close personal friend. We talked about a range of things, including her pivot from being a product-oriented company to being a platform play. She also shared a great deal of hard-won entrepreneurial experience that I think will be incredibly valuable to any founder. Lisa Tamayo, welcome to Fill the Boot.
Thank you so much, Lance. I'm really excited to be here.
So excited to have you. Now, I do need to make a full disclosure here that, in fact, we know each other quite well. I'm an investor in your company. I'm on your board of directors. We've been good friends for a number of years, and I'm your dungeon master, so you have to behave.
Oh, okay.
Now, you've moved back and forth between the entrepreneur world and the angel investment world. How does your exposure as an angel inform the way you think about running your business and doing fundraising?
I would say that I'm a lot more honest with myself. I think of things as though I was an investor, because I was. And what would I want to know as an investor? It's definitely helped broaden my perspective. I will also say that being an investor, in my humble opinion, is easier than being the founder. Because we did our own company, it was acquired. I became an investor, and then I became a founder again. And coming back to this side of the table was so much harder than looking at deal flow and mentoring companies and all that.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find anyone disagreeing about that. Being an entrepreneur is an absolutely all-encompassing, all-engrossing activity.
Yeah.
For some context, why don't you talk a little bit about your company, Scollar?
Okay, so Scollar is it's funny because, let me just back up. When we first started Scollar, and you were there at the beginning when we first started talking about Scollar, we used to call it a smart collar. There was an all-in-one smart collar. And over time, through talking to investors who get quite squeamish about Scollar, we changed the way we talk about it. And along the way, we changed the way we view it because we didn't realize quite what we were creating. So what Scollar is an ecosystem that has a connected device that's instrumented. It has a mobile app and a marketplace, and it is an open system that's designed for collaboration. So we moved the company from the Bay Area to Kansas City so that we could partner with the people here in the animal health corridor. And one of our big partners is a global pharmaceutical company who we are working with to create this very personalized approach to caring for animals. And that's the benefit of creating the ecosystem that we have. And when we first started it, we had no idea that that's what we were creating. It's like, let's just make a collar that does everything. But it's actually so much more than that.
It's been an interesting evolution from really a very product and device-centric model to now where you're at, which is the device is an enabling technology, but it's far from being at the core of what your offering is.
That's right. That's right. In fact, we are spinning up the marketplace within the app that will enable you to buy your pet supplies within that marketplace. The difference will be, instead of, like, say, you go, I could do that with Chewy. The difference with Scollar is that we have this instrumented device, and also we know about you and your animal on a deeper level. So we can make appropriate recommendations based on the type of animal, where you live, what you've purchased before, and we can create this very personalized experience for the pet parent, because that's what, we used to call them pet owners, but now we literally call them pet parents because they want the same level of quality of life that we ourselves have. And so we can create that very personalized experience. And so the marketplace and everything we've done to create that intelligence is really the IP of Scollar. The caller, yes, of course. However, the marketplace is truly the meat and potatoes of what we're doing.
So how did you come to that realization, or what drove you to make that pivot in orientation?
I would say one of the big surprises for me, having been an investor for years, was the lack of willingness on the Bay Area investors to do anything with hardware. And John, my longtime business partner and longtime husband, used to say jokingly that, you would get in a room in front of investors and you tell them that it's hardware and half the room is immediately like tapped out. And then you talk about the fact that it's the animal industry and the other half taps out, and then you're standing there talking, it's just crickets. And so we went, why is that? Hardware's hard, it's aptly named. But I just don't think we knew really what we were creating in the beginning and why it was so valuable. Like the pharma company, they're trying to drive compliance on using their products. We can get closer to their customers than they can get. The information they have is basically where the customer bought the product. We can tell them the breed, the age, where they live, what kind of products they use, if they've been effective in the past. We can get so close to the customer. And that was the aha moment as we started to talk to partners and ask them what they needed, what were they looking for to create in an ecosystem like this, that we realized that we have the ability to get the industry professionals, service providers, and product manufacturers much closer to the person that has that animal. And then also that we could create network effects with all these partners whose distribution channels we can expand on simultaneously. And so then we started realizing it was actually like the smartphone, except for animals and around their neck. And that's a much grander proposition than, hey, we have a smart collar.
And it's a nice analogy, because I think people can wrap their head around it, because people say the word platform a lot. Yeah. And to the extent that it's really lost all meaning. But when you can say, it's this kind of platform, here's the kind of ecosystem we're creating. So it's like, oh, I can see that. I have one of those. I've seen that have success. Now, it's taken a long time to get here. And we've talked a lot about persistence. And maybe you could talk about why you think persistence is so critical for founders.
I know part of the way we've spoken about this is the concept of iterate, fail, eventually succeed. And I believe that the idea of persistence is really predicated on the concept that failure is never an end point. And I had to get to that realization in my own mind. We ran out of money. We had the fires in Santa Rosa, and so we had to basically sort of pause the company for a year and a half to deal with issues around that. And I felt at times in the early years that we would never get there. And I then would go back to, I want this so badly. I know it will work. I just don't know how to get there. And I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I got to the point where I was like, I'm going to make this happen no matter what. I just have to believe. And so I literally got it tattooed on my arm where I could see it every day, all day long. I looked down, there it is, belief. And that was a turning point for me. It made me realize that that overnight success story is always preceded by years and years of work. And you don't hear about that. I jokingly say that we're going to be the 5.5-year success story, overnight success story, because the other piece of it too, Lance, was the industry had to catch up to where we were headed. We had this grand idea, and it was the same thing with our first company, which was acquired by Autodesk. We had this grand idea about where the industry should go, but the people that were in the industry were not there yet. So we had to kind of wait for the industry to evolve and mature around us. And then these companies started coming to us and saying, hey, we hear you have this open platform ecosystem and we want to be in on it.
I relate to that so much. I remember when I was doing Anonymizer back in 95, 96, and I'd say, hey, we've got this amazing internet privacy company. And the response was often, wow, tell me about this internet thing. We may have been a little too early.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, and any tricks for staying motivated other than literally tattooing it on your arm?
I would say for me, it's been about accepting that I'm not going to have all the answers and being really willing to learn. When the initial team tapped me to be the CEO, I was like, I don't know. I'm a finance person. I can't do this. Along the way, I made a decision that I wanted to be the best CEO that Scollar could be, and I just put myself to learning it. And I think there's a lot to that, that grit that you end up having to have, and allowing yourself to grow. And that, you asked me in one of the questions recently, what is the one thing you would tell founders? And I would say, allow yourself to grow. And know that you're going to fall down and get back up, and fall down and get back up, and fall down and get back up. And it's just part of the process, because I'm being polished to be the leader that Scollar deserves. So
yeah, if you're not willing to experience a vertical learning curve, then probably being a startup CEO is not for you.
yeah.
Now, thinking of persistence, you've now pitched a lot of people. How many investors have you reached out to and have you tracked over the last few years?
I would say that in our database, we have well over 2,000 investors. We've probably reached out to 1,500 of them. We've gotten a lot of no's and a lot of just flat out ignoring. We never took that first silence as a no. We would, keep reaching out. I've probably presented, in amalgam, probably 700 investors, some in big groups, some in smaller groups, some more than once. We have 19 investors in Scollar at this point.
I think that's a really important reality.
Say again.
I think it's a really important reality that I talk to people and like, I've pitched so many investors. I've talked to 20 people. Like, no, you're not really understanding what a lot is. And that's why I wanted you to tell that story.
I had someone who had a really fabulous idea. She was in San Francisco and she was telling me, I've made a list of my top 30. And I was like, oh, sweetie, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You go pitch to 2,000 before you're done. I mean, it really, and here's the other thing. And I know you and I've spoken about this too, because one of my favorite books is Pitch Anything, which you've also read. And the idea that the investor needs me more than I need them was something I had to actually really embody physically. And it made me realize that I don't want just any investor in my round with me. I want people who understand what I'm doing, who are going to take the journey, who are going to bring value in their brain trust, in their network, who are going to get in the weeds with me. And so we've literally walked away from people who seem like they might be interested. It's like, you're just not going to be a fit for us. And that maybe sounds counterintuitive, but, it's basically like a marriage. Lance, you're part of our investment group and you're on the board of directors. You're part of a family. So I need to make sure that you are, you really understand and can, and going back to your original question, like, how do I keep myself motivated? You're one of those people. Iris is one of those people. My team are those people. I surround myself with people that, can see me in a slump and, prop me back up and say, keep going, kid. And so that's really valuable as an investor as well.
That was going to be my follow-up question was, how has the way you pitch evolved? In addition to sort of being more choosy and taking control, what have you learned about that pitching and how has that changed from where you started?
I'll tell you a story, one of my most painful stories, and I think you've actually heard this story before. I was pitching to Band of Angels in San Francisco. John was there, and I was at the front of the room, and there was a gentleman in the room who was asking, like, what is this EPS thing. How does that even work? And it was very early on in my pitching career. And I entertained the question and tried to answer like, this is how this works. And then looked at John, and because he was very clearly not in alignment with me. He was, he was souring the room. John tried to answer the question. And what I experienced while I stood up there, as I looked around the room, was the whole room just shut down. And when the person that was running the meeting said, is there anyone interested in learning more about Scollar? Not one hand. There was 30 people in the room, not one hand went up. And we're leaving the building. It's in downtown San Francisco. And John looked at me and goes, what did you do? And I was like, I am never going to do that again. And the lesson for me was, again, going back to the investor needs me more than I need them. That moment when you're up at the front of the room is not the moment to allow someone to derail you, and they will try. So what I learned is, if someone asks me a question about, like, so how does the technology work? I said, that's an excellent question. I'm happy to take that offline with you. What other questions can I answer for you? And I will literally re-steer the conversation to where I want it to go. Because I think what those investors in the room are looking for is, can we trust this person with our money to do what she's standing up there saying she's going to do?
Yeah, and so many of these questions are way too far in the weeds for a pitch level conversation. But I think often the people in the room want to look smart, or they're just curious and they want to dig, but it's not actually a real due diligence kind of question. They're probably not a serious investor anyway.
And someone said to me also, if someone asks you that level of question, they haven't grokked what you're doing, which means I needed to back up and think, how am I not explaining this in a way that someone is literally in the audience going, like nodding and like looking up at the ceiling and thinking like, this sounds really interesting. If they're thinking like, what kind of radios do you have in there? Not only are they not the right investor for me, but I haven't communicated the big value to them. And so that's my fault. And I went back and figured out how to get to that story a lot quicker. And also my team makes me practice. I practice and practice and practice, and you've made me practice, which means that I'm very comfortable up at the front of the room. And so it can be more conversational, and that's something that I've also changed. I don't like it when I see an investor or an entrepreneur, they get up there and they don't know what they're saying, and then they're umming and ahhing, and they don't really know how to answer the questions. Like, dude, be an expert. Get up there and smash it.
You need to know your stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, I actually just used you in one of my recent episodes. I talked about your children's book and narrative, and talk about how that came to be and what you've seen with that.
Yeah, that has actually paid off in spades, and we're getting ready to write the next one. So we have something we call the 660 rule that Fumi brought to us. Fumi's my chief scaling officer. And the 660 rule is, tell the story of what you're doing so a 6-year-old could understand it and a 60-year-old could benefit from what you're saying. So we decided to write a storybook about a millennial couple that adopts a dog and then finds a stray kitten and adopts that. And it's basically the story of how Scollar fits into their world. And it's called Life with Gus and Monkey. So what we started doing, in fact, one of our investors here in Kansas City, we did the whole pitch deck for him. And he's a young millennial married with a couple of dogs. We did the pitch presentation and he's like, oh, it's pretty interesting. I said, you know what, Andrew, we just wrote this storybook. Can I read it to you? And he's like, sure, why not? So we put it up on the screen and I'm reading as he's looking at the pictures, and it's simple. It's a storybook, right? And I look over at him and he's doing this. He goes, I totally understand what you're doing now. And so then we flipped it. Whenever we would meet with investors, we would do the story first, and then we would talk about the business. And so then when this global farmer reached out to us, we wrote a story for them called Gus and Monkey Fight Bugs. And when we were in the initial phases with them, we presented it to them, and it scared them because it was such a future vision of how they could interact with the customer using our platform and all these amazing things that we could do. They said that we can't go here. And I said, well, we're not going to go here today. We're going to go there sometime in the future. Let's start right here where your issue is. And we were just talking about it today with this partner who we are now 8 months in a very deep relationship with. And I said, remember when we presented Gus and Monkey Fight Bugs to you, and you almost tapped out. And she said, and here we are 8 months later, we've actually made what you wrote about in that book. And it's time to write the next one, which is this whole kind of marketplace and how it creates this, personal journey for the pet parent. But telling the story of Scollar through these storybooks has been so groundbreaking and life-changing for us, because we can literally hand the storybook to someone and they get it.
Yeah, the power of narrative is amazing. People don't remember data. They're not going to remember some little detail that you give them. But you can remember, a 6-year-old's child's level story, and it allows you to picture it. It allows you to inhabit that, to sort of go, oh, I get what it would be like to use this. And it's feedback that I give all the time to people is I'll read their deck and said, I have no idea what it looks like when your customer is engaging with the thing you're selling. And so how do I even analyze whether this is a good company if I can't begin to picture that thing?
Yeah.
So I'm going to pivot here a little bit. We've talked a lot about sacrifice and what goes into this, the amount of work that goes into it. But I think as just a really useful thing for a lot of entrepreneurs to wrap their heads around, why don't you talk about the kind of level of sacrifice that goes into being a startup CEO?
So I know that you just interviewed our friend Che very recently, and in the early days of Scollar, we were spending our money. We wanted to do it, self-funded, keep it in stealth for a little while so we could really get the foundation. And so, it's like, oh, we'll throw 150,000 at this and we'll see what happens. And, it's like 200, 250, 300. And I said to Che, I don't even know where this is going to stop. And he said, Lisa, it's going to hurt a whole lot more before you actually make money. And, I thought at the time, I was like, okay, maybe $500,000. Well, John and I personally have $1 million into the company. And we've built all the technology for just under $3 million with our investors and our corporate partners and our own investment. We had to sell property, our property. We had to liquidate our assets. I had to not drink the super nice Earl Grey tea, but get the Tetley on the bottom shelf. I mean, talk about sacrifice. We had to get the bottom shelf tequila instead of the really nice stuff. I think I couldn't have imagined the amount of sacrifice, not just financially, time-wise. I just started getting a paycheck in May after 5 years. We moved halfway across the country to grow the business. I would never have imagined, if you had said to me 5 years ago, you're going to move to Kansas City, I would have been like, I'm sorry, where's that? You
were going to leave wine country for this company.
I know, and our in-person D&D game, right? I would say the other piece that's less noticeable is the emotional sacrifice, the emotional toll that gets, you have to pay. It gets extracted in years and in blood and in sweat. I would never have realized this. I don't think I've ever worked harder in my life, and this is my 5th company. So that was a surprise. It's just now starting to level out where the sacrifices are paying off. We've doubled the amount of people we have on the team. We have 8 people on the team now. We're getting ready to put this amazing product, the collars and the marketplace, go live. All of these customers that have been waiting for 3 years for us to get this collar out are thrilled. They've stayed with us this entire time, and now we've been letting them know, getting their sizes and their addresses, and they're thrilled. So all of that sacrifice is starting to pay off. Now it's a different kind of stress. It's more like, oh my gosh, it's go time. But yeah, I just don't think you can know what the sacrifices are going to be until you're knee deep in it. And then you have to decide, is it worth it? And unequivocally, it's always been worth it for John and I to do this, because we can literally change this industry with what we're doing.
Now, you're doing some very exciting things. What have been the biggest obstacles that you've run into? And maybe the ones that were the biggest surprises?
Well, the collar design has changed several times. We did not know anything about hardware. We're software dorks. We had to learn. That was an enormous obstacle. It's one thing to put it in CAD and say, oh, this is really beautiful. It's going to be, it's going to work like this. And then to have someone prototype it, or a manufacturer say, I can't manufacture that. That was an enormous hurdle. We actually fired our first MEID team. We took the first prototypes of the collars to CES with us. And over the course of a few days, several thousand people played with them. And by the end of the third day, they were starting to break. It's like, oh, you got to redesign this thing. So hardware is an enormous hurdle, and you really have to have the stomach for it. Also, another hurdle was people just didn't understand what we were doing. It was too soon. They, open platform. Someone actually said to me two things that have stuck with me. One person said, "Is this a niche play?" And I was like, hello, smartphone. And then another person said, oh, I could make this company in 8 months and take you out of business. And 5 years later, we're, finally getting this thing off really, really off the ground. And we've got incredible talent. So that was another hurdle, was finding the right talent, because we have mechanical engineers, software engineers, firmware engineers, programmers. We've got an e-commerce manager now. We have to have people that can create algorithms. We have to have an incredible marketing team because we're doing all this omni-channel marketing stuff. So finding people that can do this kind of work is also an enormous hurdle. And I told Frumi, who does a lot of recruiting for us now, I said, don't bring me anyone unless they're a hell yeah. And so it means we've gone through a lot of frogs to find a few princes and princesses.
It's all getting the right people on the bus, right? There's that old analogy, and you want to set that bar high, and not go, I guess this person will work. You want to have that excitement.
Yeah.
So this is not your first rodeo. You talked about your previous startup experiences. Well, there's been a few years in between. How has the experience, the process, the ecosystem changed from, say, Green Building Studios to Scollar?
Well, when we did Green Building Studio in 1998, we started it and we sold it in 2008. We were doing software as a service before anyone even knew what it was. And we created an open schema, Green Building XML, which is now a global standard. Nobody was doing that sort of work either. We've always lived literally on the edge of a blade. And we think wouldn't it be cool if, right? Founders do that. For us, it's been a real imperative to make things better. The other piece of it is John and I are both sustainability experts, and we both have advanced degrees in sustainability. So in 1998, when we first started Green Building Studio, sustainability was not a thing. I mean, it was still very much in its newborn stage. Now it's in diapers, right? We've made some progress over the last 20 odd years, but the technology is a lot better now. There's a lot more integrating tools. So some of the pieces of the marketplace we haven't had to create from scratch, which when we did Green Building Studio, we had to create it all from scratch. Also, the chipsets are smaller, so we can create the kind of technology we want. We wouldn't have been able to do this 20 years ago because the actual physical chips, hardware, were not available. As an example, one of the things that we're doing is putting a cellular chip which works with multiple carriers globally. So if you're in one region, it will automatically flip to the cellular coverage in that region, whereas most of all of our competitors are on either AT&T or Verizon. So if you're in Sprint land and you're on AT&T, the collar isn't going to work, sorry. But this chip wasn't available even a year ago. And so when we discovered it, we were put this in the collar, because this way we can spread this around the globe, which is our goal, and not have to change the chip for the telecommunications piece. So it's been things like that have made it easier to do this kind of work.
It also really is a good answer to that question that I think investors are always asking is why now? And there are a lot of those things, the ecosystem, the capabilities, the hardware, the third-party integrations that make it, we're not going to say easy, but possible in a way that really wasn't before.
That's true, right. And as an example, now we're in the time of COVID. John and our mechanical engineer went to China 2 years ago when we were doing our first real prototypes. Now we're doing our first articles and prepping for final production, but they can't go to China. So we've had the technology, we had to figure out how to create a system where our handler in Shenzhen can show us exactly what's going on. We can communicate, and the technology is available now for us to do that with these video calls like what you and I are doing, and that we didn't have anything like that. I mean, I remember, was it Cisco telepresence? That was the only thing years ago, these enormous, $50,000 setups.
Yeah, enormously expensive as well, not mobile, had to be built. And then, of course, who else had one? It was like, the first fax machine. Who are you talking to?
Exactly, right, yeah.
So you've had some experience with incubators and accelerators, and this is a process that so many founders go through to try to get their thing off the ground. And I'm not going to ask you to name names, but it's kind of, what's your feeling about the benefits and trade-offs, and what were your experiences there?
I would say it really depends on what level of experience you bring to the table. For us, as I said, this is our fifth company, so we've built companies from the ground up, and we fell all over ourselves in the first one. So we learned a lot about what not to do. I would say we applied for multiple accelerators, didn't get into one. Actually, we did. We got into Y Combinator Startup School, which was okay. It was fine. They're mostly software. They like young, we're like 25-year-olds. But I would say the model, I feel, and this is my humble opinion, is flawed, because the expectation is they're looking for the next unicorn. And I've said to the team, when we sell Scollar, I want to help pay this forward, mentor people, do an incubator and accelerator, not with the intention of a 10x return, because the companies that feed the economy are the smaller ones. And so I've always been supremely frustrated with the expectation that comes out of these accelerators and incubators. Like, I'm going to give you 100,000, I'm going to take 6% or 8% of your company, which I would never do, because $100,000 won't get you anywhere. And then you're giving away all this equity. And then the training, you need supremely talented, experienced people in that accelerator to help you get through all the landmines of building a company. I have honestly learned more by handpicking my mentors like you than I've learned even in the Y Combinator Startup School, honestly.
It's a fascinating problem that so much of this entrepreneur ecosystems are built around that unicorn model. It's about getting seed funding and then getting your A rounds, getting venture capital and growing and having a massive exit or something like that. But that's such a tiny fraction of the businesses that start. And so if someone says, I want to own my own company, like 99% of it's going to be something like a pizza restaurant or a plumbing contractor, or, those are in fact the vast majority of entrepreneurs, not the people like us who are always, trying to do that moonshot and then failing a lot.
Yes, there's a lot of that. Yeah. And it became even more clear, like in the time of COVID, because the companies, the little cafes and restaurants and tattoo parlors and hair salons, those were the ones that really suffered so greatly. And then the whole sort of community started to kind of buckle as a result. It made me feel even more strongly about this. And the other thing is, I was reading something, I don't remember who the VC was, but he was actually telling people you should not be planning your business around getting a VC round. There are so many other ways to raise money, and I have tried all of them. In fact, we're entertaining PO and AR financing and corporate partnerships who are quite lucrative as well over that VC round, because quite frankly, I would worry about, saying, okay, I need a $10 million round and you're going to take 20% of my company and then you're going to tell me how to run my company. That's a losing proposition for me. I've spent 5 years in the weeds on this thing. So I think it's a maybe not the smartest way to bring money in, but it's the most obvious model.
Right. I mean, I've been fascinated. I've been telling a lot of people about your experience with the corporate partner model, which is appealing in all kinds of ways.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. In fact, we're getting ready to do a webinar when we're going to make the big announcement about who this partner is, the end of August, right as we're getting, the first callers will be in the field, the marketplace will be live. Like, this is like the realization of all this. And we were talking about, what do we want to say? And the beauty of this has been the ability to collaborate on a really deep level, learn what they want, they learn what we're doing, and then we really figure out, like, how can we meet in the middle on the fact that we want the best for pets. We want the best for animals. And how can we do that together? And that has been so tremendous. And let's be honest, the fact that they've put in a really nice chunk of change into Scollar is really helpful. And they didn't take equity. They are very invested in us being successful because it will make them more successful.
Yeah, I mean, I like that model a lot. And the VC model just requires such strange things. Like, I've seen a lot of people talking about that they really don't want to do an A round with a company that isn't growing 30% per month. Right? And that's not most companies. And it's a very, very tiny sliver of people who match that. It's a little more forgiving at the angel level. Their angels are more flexible in who they'll invest in. At that level, what do you think separates the people who are successful at raising angel capital from the companies that aren't able to get it done? So putting your angel hat back on a little bit.
I would say persistence and learning. Whenever I've presented, I've asked, what can I do better to help you understand this? Why are you not interested? Going back to what I said earlier, putting yourself to learning, because it's a very humbling experience to hear someone say, well, I'm not going to invest in you because of X, Y, or Z. It's also the most valuable thing you can get out of them. And so, putting myself to hear that feedback has enabled me to get better. And Fumi calls these make us better moments. And before I present, she'll say, what's the one question you don't want them to ask? And then, now they're because I've answered them all. But initially it was like, how are you going to scale, or what's your go-to-market plan, or all these different questions. She said, okay, let's create an answer. Let's answer the question. Because there's really no hiding. And I would say, going back to, you just recently met another of our investors, Iris, who's with Golden Seeds. And when she...
her interview will be up by the time yours goes up.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I adore her. She is my other boot. The two of you are my two boots. But she said to me, I'm putting my investment dollars on your forehead. I'm trusting you to do this. And so I think there's a lot of the angel investors looking, if it's a moonshot, you're going to pivot along the way, which you've seen. We've pivoted with Scollar a couple times. Can I trust this person to ride this wild ride and handle it and come out with something appreciable on the other end? And here we are 5 years later in Kansas City, ready to launch this thing. And the answer is yes, but you have to grow into that. I mean, I certainly remember you remember when I first asked you to invest in the company, I was beating around the bush, and finally you looked at me and said, ask the question, Lisa. And I was like, and now I'm like, you want to get in here. So let's go. So, there's a confidence that's built on taking those, not only taking those risks, but really, allowing yourself to get better, listen, grow, learn. absorb. And then the angels now, I go back to them and say, look, we're doing this and that and the other. You need to get back in the round. And many of them re-upped because I did that.
That's right. Well, you make promises and then you keep them, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
So when you were an angel, what made you pull the trigger? What was the sort of thing? And are there any companies that you're particularly proud of that you have gotten involved with? And what was it that got you to get involved with them?
We made investments in two alternative energy companies, and it's been eight or so years now, still waiting for them to, get to where they've said they're going to go. They're making progress. Mostly the reason we invested in those was because it was something that John felt really strongly about. We've always been very sustainably focused and future focused. So for us, it was about enabling this future technology to come to the fore. I mean, we put solar panels on our house 15 years ago. Before, now you can get them so inexpensive, but we paid like $30,000 for these things. They're never going to pay back. But for us, it's always been, any sort of investment we've made has always been about enabling the future to happen. And one of my heroes is actually Elon Musk, when he was talking about SpaceX and saying that they felt like they had a 10% chance of making it happen. And they had 3 spectacular failures. Each time a rocket blows up, it's millions of dollars, right? And they're like, well, we're running out of cash, so this one better work. Number 4 happened to work, right? And that willingness to just continue to shoot for something that is worth doing is what entices me. And so I've also on my own invested in companies that are on the bleeding edge of sustainability, because that's really important to me. Not just because, it's just like cool, word, but because they're actually integrating in a way that they're seeing the results of from a financial perspective. So those are the things that have attracted me.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot, where companies will present to a room, and they've got to have some good financials, and the company needs to make sense. But if they're doing something that makes the world better, that engages with people's sense of mission and purpose, the chances of getting an investment just go through the roof. So when you can do well and do good, that's always a great combination.
And I think also, from an investor perspective, looking at the people that I've mentored, I like a certain amount of candor and transparency. You've said this to me so many times. The only thing I know about your financial projections, Lisa, is that they're wrong. And it's true. How much candor can you throw in there? Like, do you really think you're going to be at 200 million? Well, I sure hope so. I mean, I can show you all the formulas. I have good reasoning for this, but do I know? No.
Right.
No. I can get you, answers. I can keep you posted. So I think that the founder that's willing to be super honest, I want to know more about them.
Yeah, right. It could be a factor of 10 in every direction. I think the first time I said that to you, you had some financial projection 5 years out with 4 significant figures.
Yeah, 5 years out. And I think this year we're going to just tip $1 million.
That's right. It's like, yeah, it's going to be pretty random. All right, so if there's one piece of advice that you'd like to leave for other founders, what would it be?
I would say that when it's dark and you're lying awake at 3 a.m, because we all do, I do still, and you're thinking, I can't, I don't know what to do, I can't do this. You got to believe in yourself. And if you don't know what to do, you got to go find the answer, because the companies that have changed things, that have been significantly successful, have all been, at least the ones I've really studied deeply, just keep coming back to the drawing board and not view failure as a final failure, but an iteration on the journey, right? I mean, I don't even know how many times I've collapsed in a puddle of tears or tripped and skinned up my knees or broken my nose. Now I'm getting better at like stumbling and not falling. And you have to learn that through experience. So if you're going to do it, buckle up, settle in, and believe that you can do it, and then just take the journey. You know, it's a hard journey. It's worth it. Now that we're here, it's totally worth it. There were times I thought, oh my gosh, is this worth it? Look at what I've decimated our fortune. What did I do? But now that we're here, I'm like, yes, it's been totally worth it. But there's no substitution for the gauntlet.
Yeah, you can go to class, you can read books, but there is literally no substitute for doing the thing.
Yeah.
All right, last question. Are there any organizations or resources that you'd like to give a shout out to that you think are particularly valuable to entrepreneurs that maybe they should go check out?
I would go check out, with our first company, we had the SBDC, which is Small Business Development Center, and then SCORE, which is retired executives. So those are always really good starting places.
Finding some mentoring organization.
Finding a mentoring organization, right. And so Kansas City, as an example, has lots of entrepreneurs, and there's lots of organizations here. And before the time of COVID, I was out all the time, like meeting people in these different networks, women-led networks and founder networks, and just getting out there. I think it really depends on where you are. Find people who are going to who are sharing the journey with you. Like I always joke that I collect CEOs because I want to be in conversation with and relationship with people who are going through the same struggle I am. So I think that's been super valuable. I would also say go and find people who will support your dream. Like for us, it's been partners, banks, financial organizations, and you go talk to them, find out what do they need from you. And then when you find people that there's some chemistry with and some synergy with, keep them, bring them into your fold and keep them there. I think it's going to be different for everyone. For us also, it's been about finding the right networks of professionals. One of the first things we did here was we got involved with the groups that are training up the next generation of programmers, UI, UX developers, coders, because we need those people. And so we got involved with them very early on so that we could be part of like helping them, as they're graduating up out of that process. In fact, we're bringing in an intern from one of these academies here. So, go find the people that are going to fill your, what we call our virtual bench, fill your virtual bench with those people, and then bring them in when you can. And that sounds counterintuitive, right? Like I can't afford to bring people in yet. Fill your virtual bench anyway with people that you are going to need eventually. Right.
You want to be building the connections in advance of when you actually need to use them. Well, that's fantastic. I think that's actually a great place to wrap up. Lisa, it's been a tremendous pleasure to see you and talk with you, and continued fantastic success.
Thank you. And yeah, it's now it's getting to the fun part, and I will also just give you a shout out because you have been such a tremendous support for me these past years, as well as friend and boot. And I think,
in fact, you are responsible for the name.
Yes, I am. Go find people that like you. That's been one of the greatest things I've been able to do is surround myself with people who are going to be honest and support me. And I know I've called you in tears more than once. So thank you for that.
It's the mentoring journey, I think. Well, fantastic. Again, thank you so much for coming on Feel the Boot.
Thanks for watching this episode of Feel the Boot. I hope you found it useful and interesting. And if so, please do the usual: like, subscribe, ring the bell. If you are getting value from this, please do subscribe. It makes a big difference, and share this with other entrepreneurs. I'm trying to help as many people as I can, and the bigger the audience, the more I can justify continuing to create content. Till next time, ciao.